John Feinstein, who sadly passed away yesterday at the age of 69, took us all by surprise.
Definitely surprised by that text yesterday afternoon.
Terrible news. Our condolences go to his family, his children, all of his family. Really a beloved. EB's called him a complicated figure, and it's true, but beloved. And man, just a monster in the industry. I mean, I mentioned this earlier. Yeah. Our show was really modeled in 1995 after the Sports Reporters. Kind of probably why we started with ties and we dressed up and we were four guys.
A younger, hipper version.
We were younger. Exactly. Kind of. I think we might have even been described that way in one of the early articles about our cable access TV show. But it was modeled after the Sports Reporters, which at the time was kind of a new show. Like, we had never seen a show like that where they took a lot of guys from the Washington Post, Tony Kornheiser, Michael Wilbon, and John Feinstein, and paired them with some of the biggest sports writers in the country, like Mitch Albom, who was Detroit, Bill Conlon, who was Philadelphia. I think there was William Roden, who was like L.A., I believe. And Feinstein was big for that. And then, of course, the books and Season on the Brink. And, man, Just the accomplishments are unreal.
Yeah, his impact on the industry and the words you're seeing describe John, and you kind of you've known it all along, but when you get to know someone after a while, even though our relationship was largely through the radio, you just kind of take for granted. But Titan, legendary, icon. These are the words that people are using to describe John, because of his impact on the industry. And I know I was trying to say last segment that when, Season on the Brink came out, it was just such a historic book. I read it. I made sure later that because I kind of cheap. I think the first one I bought was paperback.
Bought a used version?
So then I wanted to get a hardback of it. But every book, the baseball book, remember it like that was like Christmas when that book came out. The tennis book that he did. Season or Good Walk Spoiled, the Army. I mean, these books. It got to a point where you couldn't keep up. He wrote too many books. He started writing children's books. He started writing novels.
He was like Jakes was saying. He was grinding it out.
Yeah, and it blows your mind.
10 years.
Like if you go into a brick and mortar bookstore, and I know there's not that many of those these days, and he basically has there'll be a whole shelf.
Yeah, it's his. He owned this. He owned the section.
A whole shelf in the sports section. It's not just. It's not just a little sliver. It's like
and it's not just
volumes
because he just wrote books. He wrote impactful, best-selling killers.
And I don't know that he ever made money off of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
But Hard Knocks and those type of shows, Feinstein was doing it before. Because he got inside the locker room and gave you what Bobby Knight was really like.
Yeah.
And that is really what we now are kind of used to with social media. We're used to it with shows like Hard Knocks, but that didn't exist. The world that he showed didn't exist but for John Feinstein.
Yeah. I mean, it just the stories, his memory, his ability to recall dates. He wasn't perfect, but he was pretty darn good at it.
His memory was absurd.
Just, he could just recall where a situation was, what hole, the pairing, what round the tournament game was, who he's sitting next.
And look, those details showed in his writing. Like if you read the books, he had details.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, on a personal front, I remember writing Still Barking. All right. I'm not a writer. I'm not a trained journalist. I went to law school, but I never learned how to write any sort of book. So I decided to put the book together and I feel good about it. But I reached out to certain people to do testimonials. I was a little sheepish to ask him because in my head he's a real author, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I am a real author, but in my head,
he's a legend.
Right. Multiple New York Times bestsellers on his resume.
You're nothing.
Got nothing.
Right.
You're nothing.
You got zipping.
Exactly.
You're nothing.
You're capturing my perspective. You don't need to keep rubbing it in.
You are emphasizing that.
Yeah.
I mean,
just know you're a nothing.
I get it. I'm trying to tell you that's how I felt.
That's more important than John being a Titan. You're a nothing.
Right. But I sent him an email, and actually, before I had decided to self-publish the book with Dennis Tuttle, I reached out to John and a few others should I go with an agent or should I go this route? And he gave me about a half an hour on the phone, and he wasn't really in one corner or the other. He was like, well, if you go this route, these are the pros and cons. And if you go this route, these are the pros and cons. So then I sent him the email, and this is really about us. This is what he wrote about the Junkies. I've had the pleasure of working with JP Flame and his three partners and pals, Eric Bickle, Jason Bishop, and John Cake Sawville. We don't always agree with one another, but we always have fun. I think having fun is the reason why so many people have listened to the Junkies for so many years. Agree with them, disagree with them. They never take themselves too seriously. That's why I think JP deciding to write a book about how it all happened is a wonderful idea. These guys have been together forever and have endured because they really are friends and really do love sports. JP's is a story worth telling and worth reading. And I really appreciate him for doing that. And Jason kind of referred to this earlier in the show. Think about where it started. That relationship started in terms of a personal level at Cole Fieldhouse.
Yes.
When he was with Kornheiser and kind of looked at you and EB like, who are these
idiots? Who are these idiots in the locker room?
Who are these guys wearing Levi's in the locker room?
We were butt size to be in the locker room. We liked it. Imagine Valdez in there. That's what it was like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Kid in the candy store.
We really liked
it. You were in there. But you didn't have like those pads that all the reporters
had. We had nothing. We just wanted to be in there.
We just wanted to say hi to Gary.
I had no questions. In fact, I didn't want anybody to look at me. I just wanted to wander around.
Just two giant fanboys.
We literally were just wandering around.
And that's why Kornheiser and Feinstein, they noticed that.
Right. They were like, who are these kids?
They
essentially were like, they let anybody in these days. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Where are the standards?
Hey, that's LaRon Prophet.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, we built a relationship with John. And yes, it was mostly on the radio. But I think we truly can call each other friends.
Oh, for sure. And I think you're going to hear this a lot. And I know Drab's worried that I'm going to say something bad or something. I'm not going to say anything bad. But John was a complicated guy who he had a huge heart. I don't think there's any question about that, right? And he's always trying to fight for justice and equality and all those things. There's no question about it. His heart was in the right place. But that heart, and I can relate to this because I think I kind of have a big heart too. You go at it with people, and if you disagree, so 1 minute he can be incredibly touching, and then the next minute he call you a moron, and and he just had that polarizing. And when somebody described him as fearless, I do think he lived his life kind of fearlessly because he didn't care if he was a bull in a china shop, and he had an opinion that upset others. If he thought he was on the righteous spot,
he wasn't backing off.
He was, and sometimes I think he was on the wrong spot.
Well,
big time, but it didn't matter. He thought he was on the right spot, and he meant it, and that's okay.
I talked to his brother a couple different times because his brother's a member at River Bend. If I was out at River Bend, I saw him. I would say, "Hey, what's up, Bob? How you doing?" We would talk about John. He understood that. His brother understood that wholeheartedly about it.
You read it in the quote. He said, some people loved him, some people hate him, but you definitely had a feeling about him.
Yeah.
But I'd say more often, the thing that I get the most pleasure with, because John and I would go back and forth sometimes off air, but we found a common ground on the show. And I did get a kick out of his stories. And I did have tremendous respect for when I first met him, I was starstruck.
Yeah.
Well, how could you not be?
I don't think I've ever met a writer before and been starstruck. I mean, I was freaking starstruck when I first met John.
He definitely carried himself with a presence. Now, it could be an intimidating presence. Valdez was saying during the break, the first time you met him, there was an intimidation factor.
Well, I read all of his books. I grew up watching him, and I kind of looked up to him.
Of course.
And when first seeing him, I was intimidated by him.
Right, and he had that way about him. But he had so many charming little quirks too about him that we could all relate to. The parking issues that he constantly would bitch about.
Animal.
He was your spirit animal with that.
Parking.
He hated to fly. He would just drive everywhere.
Could relate to that. Yeah. So many relatable things.
And you could push his buttons, but in a fun way. Like somebody tweeted this, and it was a reminder, and maybe that's the tournament that's happening right now. Every year, we would ask him about the fifth major, the players, and that would annoy him to no end.
Sometimes, honestly, I'll pull back the curtain. Sometimes we would ask him a question knowing it was going to go off.
Right.
Like, who's going to ask him about Rizzo? Right. Because he just would go off on certain things.
Triggers.
Yeah, you're going to ask him about, if you ask him about Dan, he's going to do the Dan story, or you know what I mean? If you ask him about Rizzo, he's going to do the shutdown thing.
Is the Players Championship going on right now?
Yes.
So he'd be triggered.
Here's what else would trigger him. If he was late to we are running late.
Yes.
And we got to him late.
You have to have to be honest and say what would happen early on if you called John 30 seconds
I can
early.
tell you that Brett reached out to me yesterday and he sent me a text. And then we had a little back and forth and he reminded me. He said he yelled at me for calling him 2 minutes before going on the air. He wanted 30 seconds or less.
Right.
Look, he's official. The guy wrote 100 books.
He didn't have time for
to be efficient
BS.
with his time. He can't sit on the phone waiting to come on with us for 3 extra minutes.
I think it's kind of actually shaped our show forever. It actually irks me. A lot of things irk me. This irks me is that if a guest is on the line, everyone goes, the guest is on the line. And I think it's because of John. Like, as far as I'm concerned,
you don't want him chilling for like 2 minutes.
As far as I'm concerned, we're more important right now. Like, it's our show. We'll get to the guest when we get to the guest, but everyone panics that the guest is on the line, and it's because we've been scarred by John getting yelled at for waiting on the line.
There may be something to that.
I listen to plenty of shows where guys are on the line and they say, I'll get to them in a second, and then you're talking, and you get to them, and whatever. It irks me that we have to stop what we're doing immediately to get to the guest, but I believe it's shaped by John.
All right, we've got Barry's Verluga joining us in about 10 minutes, one of his colleagues from the Washington Post, Mike Wilbon. At 9 o'clock, we played a clip of Wilbon on PTI earlier in the show, and I think he used the 2 words that I remember, charming, infuriating, and that is kind of John Feinstein. But here are some highlights that we put together. John Feinstein, may he rest in peace.
I was having dinner in a restaurant here in Potomac with my ex-wife. This is 14 years ago. I remember because it was the week my dad died. And Snyder came in with his wife and another couple. And the manager came over and said, Mr. Snyder wants to buy you a bottle of wine. And my first instinct was to say, no, thank you. But my wife said, look, you got to do it because otherwise he's going to say he put out an olive branch and you turned it down. So I said, okay, please thank Mr. Snyder and tell him I'd like to buy his table dessert, even it up. As we were walking out, I stopped at the table and I put my hand out and I said, Dan, thanks so much for the bottle of wine. That was very gracious of you. And he turned on me and said, yeah, I was really thrilled to buy a bottle of wine for a guy who's been blanking on me for years. Now, this is in a social situation with his wife, my wife, the other guy's wife. And I looked at him. I said, Dan, if you have any issues with me, I'm happy to talk to you about it. I'll buy you lunch right here. But this is not the time or the place. And then he turned to my wife and said, how does your husband sleep at night? Huh? How does he sleep at night? Writing the things he does about people. My wife said he sleeps fine. And we walked out. I gave the bottle of wine back to the manager and told him to give it to Mr. Snyder. Why do that? Was he just being a bully? Maybe trying to be a bully. I said to him, Dan, I'll talk to you anytime, any place. He said, I don't talk to the media during the season. I said, well, you just did.
So, do you think Shire will be successful?
Who knows? I mean, who knows? When Mike Krzyzewski was 38 and 47 at the end of the 1983 season, his third year, how many people were predicting that he'd be successful, much less become "quote unquote" Coach K?
Yeah. They wanted him fired.
What?
I said a lot of fans wanted him fired.
Most fans wanted him fired.
Yeah.
I mean, Tom Butters, when I did the Legends Club, Tom Butters, who was the athletic director who hired Krzyzewski and stuck with him after those first 3 years, brought a box with him when we met. And in the box were a slew of letters from people written to him in 1983, basically saying, if you don't fire him, we'll never give Duke another penny. And in that same box were letters from the same people 7 years later when the Celtics were trying to hire him, saying, do whatever you have to do to keep him. But one of the coolest things about it is on Friday night, football players from Army and Navy, former football players, meet at a bar. It's an Irish bar in Philly when it's in Philly, and they find another place when it's somewhere else. And they meet, and they drink, and they give each other a hard time and all that. And at midnight, they all gather around the bar, and one guy from Army and one guy from Navy hold up their glasses, and they say Alton, as a tribute to Alton Grizzard, who was Navy's captain in 1990 and was killed while training to be a Navy SEAL 3 years later. And it's just, you'll never see anything cooler than that. And it makes you cry, and the guys talk about Grizzard and what a tough guy he was and why everybody respected him so much. And then, of course, you were there, Matt. You know, when they play those alma maters, nothing like it.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
I texted Denny McCarthy. I told him I was jealous. He gets to look at Nelly Corda's legs for all weekend.
You're trying to get John in trouble.
Pretty much how guys are going to.
What? How am I getting John in trouble?
I don't know. You're going to comment on it. All right. Thank you, John.
All right.
There you go.
I
Some of the clips.
I actually laughed.
Yeah, that's Jason laughing. Look at that.
That must have been 10 years ago.
Document that, please. Send that to the Radio Hall of Fame archives.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, John.
Another takeaway is that John Feinstein helped turn Matt Valdez into one of the world's biggest Army-Navy marks.
He converted me.
True.
Yeah,
it's a great book. If you haven't read his Army-Navy football book, go pick it up.
Yeah.
It's a great book. And he converted me.
Right.
And
you're trying to get us all to go.
Yeah.
He agrees with me.
Yeah.
Everyone who's a college football fan should experience it once in their life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he's never been more right about anything.
One thing I'll say is that, as John's career endured, I do and we said this when, our relationship on the air ended a couple months ago, that I know that him being on the show for him and for us was meaningful. Mm-hmm. And especially I think to him, because, he's getting up there in years and wasn't necessarily having, the same amount of
energy.
Appearances on television, or what I mean, because your career starts to wind down at some point. And we were something that he always looked forward to and it's never been more obvious than when we said that after 13 years, John was no longer going to be a weekly guest. The outrage on social media that we got. Yeah. And then yesterday, when people found out that John had just suddenly passed, just the heartbrokenness of our audience. I mean, you tweet one thing and get 500 responses. If I tweet something, about my golf game, you get one response. I mean, John passing just impacted so many people. I mean, I'm getting messages right now. Got them all day yesterday. I'm sure you guys did too.
I got messages.
What happened to Feinstein? What happened to Feinstein?
People that hadn't talked to me on text in years reached out yesterday.
And I'm really proud that we're a part of his story because he was a friggin' Titan.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Rest in peace to John and to his family and friends. I don't know. I think that people could call in and tell stories if they want.
I think we're going to take some calls a little bit later. And one thing I want to say, and the reason I brought up the testimonial is there's a lot of on-air stuff, and that was the most of our relationship. But I looked back at this email he sent, and I wrote, hopefully the book will be worthy of such a great testimonial. That was my thank you to him. Mm-hmm. And he said, sure it will be. It wasn't like you wrote much.
Yeah.
But that was... At his core, he was a good guy. At his core, 100%. He was a really good guy.
Here's what he definitely had. He had a massive heart.
Yep.
He had a huge heart.